Return on investment, or ROI, has been consistently touted by universities as a measure of how good they are at getting you higher career earnings. In fact, a recent paper by Bloomberg stated that my college's, Georgia Tech's, return on investment, or ROI, is $293,000 over 10 years with an annual cost of attendance of $29,000. But what does that measure mean? And what we'll find out in this video is that return on investment is actually quite outdated and doesn't show you the full picture. We'll talk about why and a measure that I learned at Georgia Tech in my chemical engineering curriculum that I think you should be using instead. Hi, my name is Anu, and if you're new to this channel, I recently started this to talk about all things chemical engineering and how we can use the engineering principles to improve our lives and increase our understanding of people around us. So, ROI. So I talked about Georgia Tech's ROI as $293,000 over 10 years with an annual cost of attendance of $29,000. But does that mean you should earn $293,000 after 10 years? So that's the big problem. There's conflicting ways to calculate ROI. The way I have commonly heard it is annual net profit over total capital. So you spend X amount of dollars to go to a certain program, and each year you're getting this profit. Other ones are your expected value, the value that you expect to get, minus your original value over your original value after a certain period of time. All of these would indicate that ROI is supposed to be a percent, and you would be right. So in the Bloomberg case, why are they giving us a number, $293,000? Well, the value they're stating is actually not return on investment. It's actually a value that we know in chemical engineering as net present value, or NPV. And this is kind of the first step that's a little bit better than ROI. Because ROI, if you do annual net profit over total capital, what you ignore is the time value of money. Every year, value becomes more or less valuable because of things like interest rates and inflation. For example, $10,000 worth today is worth more than $10,000 in the future, right? Because $10,000 today, I can invest that at, say, 5% interest, and I would get, what's that math real quick, $500 next year. So that $10,000 would be $10,500 in the next year. And so what what ROI misses is that even though I'm earning a certain amount of money every single year, that value becomes less valuable in today's dollars as I continue to go. Net present value solves that issue by factoring in the net present, or factoring in the interest rate. And Bloomberg actually gets their numbers from a study done by Georgetown University Center, where they share the 10, 15, 20, 30, and 40-year net present value. I'll dive a little bit more into NPV and how it calculates cash flows over each year and accounts for that interest rate. So in general, money is worth more now than money later because interest is often larger than inflation, at least in the US. Net present value discounts the cash flow in future years of the present. So suppose you made $10,000 next year. How much is that worth in today's money, right? So inflation means that the purchasing power of the $10,000 you get next year is less than the $10,000 that you have now. So at a 3% inflation rate, $10,300 today would be worth $10,000 next year. On the contrary, investments allow us to grow our money. It makes our money more valuable. So suppose I invested $9,259.26 today in the S&P and got the average rate of return of 8%. How much money do you think we'd have next year? You guessed it, we'd have $10,000. So net present value uses interest rates and inflation rates to discount the money made in the future to its value in the present. The drawback, however, is that the value is based on cash flows and capital costs, which means it's hard to compare apples to apples in the case of colleges. For example, let's say you're comparing a public school like Georgia Tech to a private school like MIT. A $200,000 capital investment and is going to be naturally smaller than a $1 million capital expenditure. And the net present value of that $1 million capital expenditure you would hope is going to be greater than your $200,000 capital dollar investment. But it still doesn't tell you if that is a good investment, right? It's just the scale is bigger. So yeah, MIT is more expensive and has a higher net present value than Georgia Tech. But does it mean that MIT is inherently a better choice than Georgia Tech? And that's where investors' rate of return, or IRR, comes in. So IRR is related closely to the NPV in that IRR is the interest rate that is required to make your NPV zero. In other words, what is the interest rate that if you were to invest your money into a hypothetical stock or savings account that grew at that interest rate, it would be equivalent to the investment that you're making into your college education or into your business. Remember that the higher the interest rate, the less valuable future money becomes to you. So if you get an IRR of 20%, it means that the capital investment is equivalent of leaving your money in a savings account that earns you 20% each year. No brainer, right? Conversely, if your IRR is a measly 2%, you might have just been better opening a high yield savings account and spending all that instead of spending all that money on college. So IRR accounts for the time value and is independent of the magnitude of the capital investment. So let's see this in action. I've built an Excel sheet just for this, which I'll link down in the description below. So here's my Excel sheet. So what I have here is obviously the capital cost, which is the expenditure I spend for college, and how much money I'm making per year, and the costs. This cash flow column tells me what is the net gain or loss that I'm getting over the year. And the discounted cash flow takes into account the interest rate, inflation rate, and of course the tax rate. Now, this is one drawback of the Georgetown study, is that the Georgetown study assumes an interest rate of 2%. Pretty low, right? Any high yield savings account can beat that. So all the numbers that they show as their net present value comes from a 2% interest rate. And they ignore inflation, ignore taxes and other expenses. So essentially, column E is all zeros. And so the numbers that they're getting, I think, are not going to be an accurate representation of how worth it college is to you. So for me, I'm in the state of Texas, so no state income tax. This is my average tax rate for an $85,000 salary. We'll get to the interest rate in just a second. Inflation rate in the US is on average 4% each year, so I'm going to stick with that. And right now, my net present value is about 296, which is about what Georgetown predicted, surprisingly. And of course, I'm assuming that I get no career growth in earnings over the next 10 years, which is unlikely because I'm a pretty good chemical engineer. But so how do I find my IRR? Well, if you go to the data column, and this is an add-on you need to get if you haven't gotten already, most chemical engineers will get it pretty close to when they start doing numerical methods, if they still have that class. And it's the solver function. So what the solver is going to do is we're going to set our net present value to 0 by changing our interest rate variable, 0.02. No constraints. You can leave out everything else in the default setting. And then when you click solve, the solver is going to figure out what interest rate is going to make the net present value 0. So let's see what happens. Awesome. So it says my IRR is a 38%, which is pretty darn good, right? It means that the money I spent on college is essentially equivalent to me of putting that money into an account that earns 38% interest every year, which is, there's no market account that does that. So in my case, college is worth it. Now, I want to end with something that I think is very important, And that what IRR and NPV really teaches us is that how worth it college is entirely in your control. Because things like your capital expenditures, your costs, and even to some extent, how much money you make, those are all things that are within your control, right? So there's things that you can do before you get into college, during college, and even after college that can help you increase how worth it college is to you. For example, when you're choosing a college, let's say you're before college, you're looking to get into college. When you're choosing a college, you want to pick a college based off of what programs are there and which one's going to give me the most money. Because the key is that what program or major you choose to study, that has more of an impact on your career earnings than what college you go to. So go to the essentially, I don't want to say the cheapest or the most inexpensive college that you can find that has your major and that has the major that's going to give you a lot of money, right? While you're in college, right, there's things that you can do to reduce your costs. And even if you work a part-time job, that's going to give you some money while you're in college. Reduce your costs. Try not to spend too much while you're in college. And that's even true once you're out of college, right? This cost column is 40,000. Now imagine if I decided to live very lavishly because of my increase in income, lifestyle inflation, and I actually spent closer to $60,000 every single year. What then is my IRR? It drops down to 14%, right? So just by living a little bit more lavishly, I've made college less worth it to me, right? So these are all things that we can keep in mind when we try to evaluate, is college worth it? Because it's not just the college that makes it worth it to us, it's also us. We make college worth it to us. Alrighty, that's it for this video. If you have any feedback, please leave a comment below. I'd love to learn. I'm still new to this YouTube thing, so trying to figure things out as I go. And if you think someone would enjoy this video, please share and consider leaving a like. Thanks. Take care.